Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today. There are a couple of people, there are a lot of good friends in this room, but there are three people I wanted to say something about before I got into what I've come here to tell you about today. I want to say about Jim and Lucy Beck. They have been willing to stand with me when we were going through this fight on religious freedom. And when we talk about these things in rooms like this, obviously there's a lot of support, but it can be very isolating. And I just want to thank you so much for having my back and for being so supportive and investing in me. I want to say a quick word about Brant Frost. You know, here we are, it's the 8th of July, right? It's the dead of summer. And just look around this room, you know? People who care deeply about their community and their country, willing to come out on a Saturday morning. That doesn't just happen by accident. That happens because of dedicated leadership of people like you. And the other person I want to thank, who always seems to be around Republican events but is often sort of unseen, is my friend Jan Horn, who's working that camera back there. One of the biggest weapons we have to fight the narrative that the left pushes is information. And being able to put the information directly in front of the people. That's one thing that I think our president does absolutely the right way, which is what drives the left bananas. And Jan and I met when my friend Steve Brown, who I see back here, he and I did a little impromptu video about religious freedom legislation. And I can't tell you, Jan and I were talking about it the other day, how many people still, maybe 2-3 years later, are still talking about that, and how, I didn't understand that issue till I watched that video with y'all, and it was really helpful. So thank you for what you do to document the conservative movement in our state. So I just, and I could go around the room and say something about just about everybody here, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to be mindful of the time. So back in November of 2015, you have things that happen in your life that sort of make you reassess where you are and where you're going. And for me, my mother's diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer and her death 15 weeks to the day after that diagnosis really made me start thinking about a lot of things. But one of the things that I started thinking about was my service in the state Senate. And 5 years in, how much longer I'm going to do this. And finally I got to a point in January of this year where I said, you know what? I'll have served 8 years at the end of this term. I think I've done what I can do in that institution. It's time for me to move on. It's time to let somebody else serve. I just became convicted that was the right thing to do. And really my thought process was that I would probably take a break from elective politics and try to work behind the scenes, support other people for other offices. But over the last couple of months, I've had discussions with a lot of friends, some of you here in this room, about staying in elective politics and seeking another office. And so what I'm here to tell you today is I am in the race to be Georgia's next Secretary of State. And people ask, why? Why is that important? Why is that something that you want to do? And the truth is, I'm very passionate, not just about policy making, but about the electoral process and how we get our elected officials in place. That's something that I've been interested in for a very long time. And the integrity of our electoral process is really the foundation stone of everything else. Every policy decision, I don't care if it's the county commission, the school board, the state house, or the White House, if we don't have confidence in our electoral process that your vote counts, and also that votes that are illegal are not being cast or counted, nothing else really matters in terms of our process, because that's where the confidence of the people come from. Win or lose, at least we can say everyone had their opportunity to have their voice heard, to have their vote counted, and now we're going to live with whatever that consequence is. In Georgia, I am tired of the left, who cannot change our election law in the legislature because the Republicans control the legislature. So what they try to do is change election law by running to a federal judge in the middle of every election that we have.
And even after it's over.
And even after it's over. But if you look at even this most recent special election with Karen Handel, we have an election on April 18th. We get down to the top two vote getters, and we have what's called a runoff. A runoff is not a new election. A runoff is a continuation of an election. But the left runs to an Obama district court judge and says, oh, you got to reopen voter registration. We don't want that 30 days to end in March. We want it to end in May. And of course, predictably, the federal district court judge appointed by Barack Obama, supports that decision and extends voter registration to May 22nd. In my view, that should not be the end of the discussion. If the left is going to try to rewrite Georgia election law, if I'm your Secretary of State, they're going to have to get the United States Supreme Court to do it. Yeah. We're not going to. The other thing that I think is incredibly important to understand, and a lot of people don't realize this happened last year, but in 2 different counties in Georgia, left-wing groups sued to have the ballots printed in foreign languages. Now, let me be real clear about this. I love the fact that America is a nation of immigrants, and we have people from all different cultures and all different walks of life, and that speak many different languages. I think that's great. That's part of what our greatness is. But when it comes to participating in the electoral process of casting your sacred, secret ballot, understanding the English language well enough to cast that vote is the price of admission. And so my pledge to you is I'm going to work with President Trump, I'm going to work with the federal officials to make sure that the law on voting is perfectly clear. That if you're going to cast a vote in a Georgia election, you're going to have to be able to read and understand English well enough to cast that vote. It's just that simple. There are also some things that we need to implement that have been on the books for a while. A lot of you may not know this, but in Georgia, we passed a law over 10 years ago. I'm sure people in this room are familiar with the idea of motor voter, where they register everyone with a pulse that gets a driver's license. Well, in Georgia, we passed a law over 10 years ago called hunter voter, that when you go get your hunting license, that you can register to vote right there. You just check a box. But we've had all these excuses about the Department of Natural Resources and how do we implement it and is there enough money? Well, let me tell you what. If every DDS office in the state is a voter registration station, you elect me your Secretary of State, we're going to implement hunter voter. It's going to happen. Now, the interesting thing about Secretary of State's office is it has a lot of different functions built into it. A lot of people don't know the Secretary of State's the guardian of the state seal. The Secretary of State is the boxing commissioner for the state of Georgia. So there are a lot of odds and ends that are kind of built into that office. But one of the other big functions is licensing. And, we have many, many licensed professions across the state. There's been a national study done by Americans for Prosperity that has demonstrated 5.4 million additional people across the country would be in the workforce if we would reform our licensure laws and make it easier for people to get licensed and get in the workplace. Now, there's some valid public safety reasons for licensing in some professions. I'm not talking about getting rid of licensing. But shouldn't we try to reform licensing laws in a way that somebody who wants to work, who wants the opportunity for good, honest work, can do that and grab that first rung on the ladder to economic success? So that's something that I think as Secretary of State That ought to be part of my job, is getting out there with the legislature and getting that reform so that we can put hundreds of thousands of our fellow Georgians to work. Now, on the corporations division, a lot of people don't necessarily come in contact with that, but if you have a small business, if you have an LLC or corporation, then you've dealt with the corporations division in some form or fashion. There are a lot of opportunities, I think, to improve the online delivery of services, and that's something that I intend to do as the next Secretary of State. The last thing I'll mention, because I don't want to go on too long, is an issue that isn't necessarily part of the description of the office that you see, but something that I think is very important. I think that Georgia needs a chief transparency officer, somebody who is making sure that government is open to the public. And there are two ways I think the Secretary of State's office can do that. One is we need a program, I call it the Georgia checkbook, where basically all of the state finances are posted online on a website that you can go see down to a check level detail. So if you want to see how your money's being spent by the State Department of Education, the Department of Community Health, the university system, where literally billions and billions of tax dollars are flowing, you ought to be able to do that. Having a little line item on a budget, in my view, is not sufficient. And I'm just talking about for states, for the state government. But if county commissions, if municipal governments, if school districts want to participate, then we will open that system up so that they can participate as well. There's a program, my friend Josh Mandel in Ohio, he's the state treasurer up there, has rolled out. It's very similar to this. And you can go on their website and, like I said, see down to, a state employee buying some gasoline at a gas station. And that's the level of detail I think you're entitled to as taxpayers. The other thing that I'm very committed to, and some of you in this room know the depth of my commitment to this, is our open records and open meetings laws. And I think that there's a real opportunity for the Secretary of State to talk about, be an advocate for, and an ambassador for open government. And Brant mentioned earlier there are two cameras set up in here. One of the things I'm hoping to do as I go around on the campaign trail is to be totally transparent, let people know what I'm saying. So that camera over there is going to my Facebook page. So, if I'm around the state somewhere and you can't come, but you want to hear what's being said and what we're talking about, you're going to be able to do that. So I feel like if I'm going to call for those kinds of reforms, I need to lead by example. I just close by asking for your help. We are just getting organized. We filed the paperwork Thursday. But I can... But I can tell you it's going to take a lot of work to win the Republican primary. It's a crowded field, and it's not just about raising money, though that's important, but we're going to need real grassroots warriors in every county of this state to be able to win the nomination. And so I just ask for your help. I ask for your support. I ask you to get involved. I know there are a lot of other races, and this is kind of down the ballot, maybe not as exciting to some. But I'm telling you, there's nothing more important than who you select to be the guardian of your electoral process. And with your help, that person's going to be me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Anybody got any questions?
Yes, sir.
Do you foresee a point where we go back to a paper ballot?
Oh, that's a great question. So questions on voting method. 2002, Kathy Cox, the state purchased these electronic voting machines that I'm sure everybody in here is familiar with. Those machines are reaching or have reached, or in some cases are past, the lifespan that was advertised that they were supposed to be usable. So the next Secretary of State will be making a decision about what replaces those. Now, I'm open to a discussion about this, but I will tell you based on my research, I think going back to the optical scan ballots, the ballots that you bubble in and run through a reader, I think that technology, first of all, is proven. It's used in more than half the jurisdictions around the country. It would be cheaper. If we refresh these debold machines or whatever vendor you wind up using, you're going to spend a lot more money because of the hardware that's involved. And then, of course, there have been concerns raised about some of the data breaches that have occurred. And a lot of those breaches are because of the nature of electronic voting equipment. It's not necessarily any evil plot or anything. It's just when you got that kind of stuff laying around, yeah, I don't think there's any Russian interference. But we eliminate all of that if we go the optical scan ballot. So I'm going into this race with pretty much thinking that if I'm the Secretary of State, we would move to an optical scan system when we refresh the electronic voting machines around the state. Yes, ma'am.
Where do you, who's the person in charge of signing up people? Where do you want to sign up for your penalty with your campaign?
So we are in the process now of getting our website up. There'll be a separate Facebook account as well, and there'll be an opportunity for electronic signups. Now I do have, I'm not sure if he's stepped out of the room, but I've got somebody with me today. Oh, Matt Fuentes right there. Matt, wave at everybody. So if you're interested in just getting on our list that we're getting started with, if you talk to Matt before you head out. But probably within the next week, we'll have a variety of ways for you to engage with us online. We just wanted to go ahead, get in the race, start raising the money, start the organizational process as quickly as we could.
John,
Yes, sir.
your plan to put all expenditures online sounds great. I suspect there'll be some people that might not like that idea who are spending the money. What would you have to, what agreement, if any, would you have to have from other branches of government to implement that? And how would you overcome their inherent lack of enthusiasm for all of us to know what they're doing?
I think that's a great question. The first thing you need to know is what has already happened. My colleague, Senator Schaefer, passed what we call zero-based budgeting in the General Assembly. Up until 2011, the only thing that even the legislators saw were additional spending. So, for example, if the Department of Community Health in 2016 spent $1 billion, and we're looking at their budget for 2017 and it's $1.1 billion, the only thing the legislators saw details on was the new $100 million in spending. We had no idea what that other $1 billion was. So we've gotten zero-based budgeting in, which provides an additional amount of detail. There's no question there would be a fight in the legislature over doing this checkbook proposal. But frankly, it would simply take an act of the legislature to require state agencies to furnish that information and then build out the database. For those of you who are curious about the cost, we did do a fiscal note on that. It's about a $2 million startup cost to get the database up and running for all state agencies and to open it up to local governments. But when you consider the fact that last year we were spending $49 billion when you include all the federal pass-through money, I think spending $2 million at the outset to get that level of transparency is a price that's worth paying. But it's definitely going to be a political fight. It's not something that can just be administratively done. It would require an act of the General Assembly. But I'm hoping that spending the next 12 months, 16 months, making this case to the people of Georgia, if I'm elected, I feel like we'll have a mandate then to move that bill forward.
Any other questions?
Brett, back here.
Yes, sir.
Senator, does the Secretary's office have any responsibility for the state archives?
So the state archives are now under, it used to be. The answer to your question is that used to be true. The state archives, I think it was 2 years ago, were moved under the aegis of the university system. So that's no longer part of the Secretary of State's sort of portfolio of responsibilities. Yes, sir.
There was some recent information in, I guess, the Marietta paper or something about data breaches perhaps at Kennesaw State and them being the keepers of the crypt or whatever with all the voting records and such. So what might you do about that situation?
Well, I think the first thing that I would do as Secretary of State would be to do a forensic audit of the entire electoral process, basically from where the state picks up at Kennesaw to the reporting to the Secretary of State's office. I mean, we need to be very, very clear about any potential breach of security that could get your confidential data out there. And I think that's got to start with an independent outside review of the current system. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of a technical question. I worked the polls, and this last election was eye-opening as to people that hadn't moved their registration in 10, 15 years. Is there a possibility to build in when you get a renewal on your license, or you move and have to get a new driver's license, that they have to like re-register? Because apparently the old one must just follow them.
So that's correct. I mean, the current law is, and just to be clear about the question is, if you live in one location, you register at that location, and then down the road you move, your voter registration does not automatically move with you. That requires an additional contact with the state to update your registration. I'm certainly open to that discussion about figuring out how that would work and what would make the most sense. We'd have to probably look for something that is triggered at the same time that you're moving, because, like, for example, with your driver's license or something like that, that may not be on the same schedule. You know, if you have a driver's license you've just renewed and then you move. So that's something that I'd be willing to certainly take a look at.
Are you not required to update your driver's license when you move? Are
You
you
know-
not supposed to have a legal address?
Yeah, I
You're
mean,
supposed to update your driver's
Yeah.
license, but not your voter
Right.
registration.
Well, that's
And
what
so-
I'm saying. If you tie it,
yeah, and so.
it would automatically.
And so again, if I will tell you this, there have been significant issues with DDS's working with different voter registration departments. I mean, that's part of the issue too. DDS is a statewide agency, but each county has its own sort of, board of elections or registrar's office. But I'm absolutely willing to look at that, and I agree with you. It is a significant problem trying to get people to have those addresses updated. And it's something that the president's talked about, this issue of even people moving between states. And they register in the new state thinking that the old state registration has expired, and it hasn't. In my case, when I was in law school, I was registered to vote in Alabama. And when I moved back to Columbus, I took a letter in person to the voter registrar. They told me my name had been taken off the list. And about a year ago, we had one of these far left Democrats who was like, well, you're still on this voter roll over here. And they still, it was inactive, but they still had me on the roll. So there's a lot of work we need to do on cross-checking between the states. There's probably a good opportunity for an interstate compact there, so that secretaries of state or statewide elections officials are cooperating and sharing, not confidential data, but at least the data to say, Steve Brown is in Pennsylvania now. We need to take him off the Georgia voter roll. We don't want to get rid of Steve though.
Any other questions? I have one while y'all thinking one. You talk about hunter registering hunters, registering people who get a license. What about automatic registration for people who go to get a concealed carry? You could call it toter voter.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that if it is good public policy to try to maximize the number of registered voters in our state, then it's good public policy to maximize the total number of registered voters in our state. So yeah, I'm for anything that makes it easier for people to access the ballot. On the other side of that equation, I want to make sure that your vote is not canceled out by someone who votes illegally. And so those two things are not mutually exclusive. We can be for robust participation in the political process, but an honest, fair process that has integrity.
Anybody else? Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, Andrew.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, what would you anticipate would be the most effective arguments against an open financial record policy? It just seems to be common sense. What are the primary arguments that would be effective against that?
The only thing that we initially, let me repeat the question. The question was, what arguments are there against a Georgia checkbook sort of open financial system? And there are a couple of things that would be said. There's a system right now called open.georgia.gov that basically has salary information. And so people are saying, oh, well, we've already got that. Well, that's not really being honest. What we're talking about is expenditures, not just salaries. The second argument I heard was, well, how much is it going to cost to do this? Well, I've given you all that information. The truth is, what you heard from Mr. Frost's question, which is bureaucrats don't want to give up any authority. They don't want to give up any power. I'm all for a citizen legislature and believe it's a great thing, but one of the effects is those people are there 12 months a year, and so they don't want to give up any control of information that then empowers all of us to say, hey, wait a minute, why are you spending this money here or there? And every dollar may be being spent very, very wisely. But I'm guessing if we got this full open transparency, we would find some places that maybe the stewardship of the dollars was not what it should be.
Or people wouldn't be doing some of the things that they are doing.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
Josh, to give you the perfect example, when the new state health benefit plan came out that looked a lot like Obamacare before Obamacare even hit the streets, you couldn't find the data to understand how the premiums were derived, who was going to pay what deductible or anything else. Digging into the website and finding a PowerPoint presentation 2 years old, we found out that of the 600,000 employees on the state health benefit plan, the raise in premiums, 2/3 of that went on the backs of the teachers. 115,000 teachers. The rest of the folks got a free ride. And they raised it twice. And the only way to get them was to use their own data against them and haul them into our senator's office and turn them absolutely red with embarrassment and then ask them, how did you even come up with this? So when you talk about those kinds of things, we need to drain the swamp, because that was put together by a bunch of doctors that don't know beans about healthcare plans and a bunch of bureaucrats in a deep state that were following the Obama plan before it ever came out. It even got called bronze, gold, and silver. And that is just a microcosm of what's going on, and we need to drain the entire Georgia state much more than I think we need to drain Washington. But that's a typical microcosm of what's going on by those 12-month employees.
Yes, ma'am.
What are we doing as far as assuring that when people are voting, that those boxes and I think there needs to be a bit more secure. I know I go to vote and there's no police officer, there's nobody there that's, making sure that everything is secure. I'm kind of a little concerned, not in Coweta County, but I'm thinking of some of the more challenging areas that things could happen when nobody's there.
Well, and a lot of people have expressed a similar concern about the integrity of the election, the security of the election. How do we make sure that that is going to in fact be secure? And as I mentioned earlier, I have become more and more convinced that the best way to do that is to migrate back to the optical scan machines, because I think that takes away a lot of the issues. You have a physical record of the vote, and a lot of the other malfeasance that could come with the data switching is taken out of the process. So I think that is probably the best answer to that question. Is how do we go about refreshing the voting machines?
Anybody else? Well, great. Thank you.
Thank y'all very much.